The committee is commenced. Kia ora tātou no reira te whare, inga iwi, inga rio, inga hawe wha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening, honourable members. Prior to the House suspension for the dinner break at 6 o'clock, the Speaker put the House into committee. So we are in committee on the Appropriation 2010-2011 Supplementary Estimates Bill, and we are to consider at this stage two amendments only, set out on SOP 246. So the question is that the amendment to Clause 5.1, set out on SOP number 246, be agreed to. I invite some member to seek the call. I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in this committee stage to address amendments in SOP 246 in the context of the broader bill. Mr. Speaker, the debate which preceded the dinner hour continued the themes in part of the budget debate which preceded this Appropriation Supplementary Estimates Bill. And the broad themes of that debate were that the country is in a difficult situation. Most New Zealanders understand that total debt is too high, although only some realise that's nearly all private debt, not public debt. And, Mr. Speaker, this is an important context to the debate and to these amendments. Mr. Speaker, most people are worried about the security of their jobs and the rising cost of living. And what is important for us as a Labour opposition to get across...
Sorry to interrupt, but can I just point out that the debate actually needs to be to Clause 5.1a, and it specifically states here that it's a supplementary estimates of appropriation, and it goes on to the addition to the supplementary as well. So the member actually needs to speak directly to these in order to facilitate the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the definitional issue which is contained in Supplementary Order Paper 246 is around replacing part of the definition of supplementary estimates to substitute the following. Firstly, that the supplementary estimates of appropriations includes those for the Government of New Zealand and the supporting information, that's document B7, and in addition the supplementary estimates of appropriations for the Government supporting information for the year 30 June 2011, B7 Volume 2. Mr. Speaker, there is the insertion of an item Schedule 1 in regard to Canterbury earthquake recovery, a matter that the Finance and Expenditure Committee will be discussing tomorrow in its hearings. And Mr. Speaker, that covers some non-departmental output expenses of, I assume that this is in thousands, so it would be 27 million for Canterbury earthquake property demolitions, and another 3 million for non-departmental capital expenditure. Which brings me back, sir, to where I was before you inserted your ruling, which is that the country recognises that it's in a difficult state. One of the reasons for that, but by no means the only reason, is the series of tragic earthquakes in Canterbury. They have taken their toll of human life, tragically. They have taken their toll of material and financial resources to the tune of some $15 billion, sir, and the departmental output expense that we see before us here is a small proportion of the total cost to New Zealand. But those Canterbury earthquakes have more than that taken their toll of our spirit, of New Zealanders' spirit. You know, it's funny the conversations you have on an aeroplane, and I was sitting next to a gentleman recently who said, you know, it almost feels like the country's in a wartime situation. And I thought there was great wisdom of that, because it presents both challenge and opportunity. Challenge because in times of wartime people tend to hunker down. Opportunity because they think in the end about what it means to be a citizen of their country, to be a New Zealander, and we learn to pull together to rise to face the challenge before us. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Canterbury earthquake reflect in this SOP is part of that. Mr. Speaker, it goes deeper and broader. In order to get out of the rut we're in, only partially of which is created by the costs of that earthquake, New Zealanders are hungering and thirsting to see a plan, a responsible, non-partisan, fair, data-driven plan that will get people back to work, get our economy moving. Mr. Speaker, I submit to you this is absolutely within scope. I see your signals, but we cannot discuss the addition to the supplementary estimates from the Canterbury earthquake, unless we understand the context, which I assume that is in thousands, it would be 27 million. That would be the normal convention. And the Chief Whip of the government benches would know that I've already covered that in these remarks. Mr. Speaker, if we are in a wartime circumstance, if New Zealanders are going to move together out of this rut, if we're going to cover the expenses of the Canterbury earthquake represented in this bill, this SOP, then we are going to have a plan for growth, for jobs, not a plan to sell off assets, Mr. Speaker. Selling off assets is the antithesis of rebuilding. It is stripping down, Mr. Speaker. And New Zealanders don't want a response to the tragedies of Canterbury to be, Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable
Mr. Chairman,
David Cunliffe.
To be simply more retrenchment and more hardship. They are looking, sir, and if I turn a little more specifically to the situation facing Christchurch, Mr. Speaker, they are now looking for leadership from this government. This government, which since September last year has created not one new position of trade training in Christchurch, which has not yet brought forward to the people of Christchurch a clear plan for whose street needs to be bulldozed and whose is going to be rebuilt. And we all know, because we've seen the pictures and many of us have visited, homes and families living with silt and liquefaction up to their ankles and broken floorboards and houses that are whistling cold in the Canterbury winter, and that's not good enough. And they also want to know not only whether their street can be rebuilt or where and when they might be assisted to move, but whether the insurance policy is going to cover the loss of their, in many cases, only asset, their family home. Now, of course, EQC, if they're insured, will cover a portion. Private insurance will cover a portion, but it won't cover the lot. And for that gap, Mr. Chairman, there is huge anxiety, and every day now that passes is a day closer to the public of Christchurch saying that Mr. Brownlee is not serving them well as the minister responsible, that it is just taking too long, Mr. Coleman. It is just taking too long. People's patience is wearing thin. With every passing day, they get aftershocks. They get their children. I'm not playing politics. I am reflecting the sentiments expressed to me and my colleagues by the people of Christchurch.
Order. Can we just... It's about
Mr.
process.
Speaker.
It's about process.
Mr. Speaker, this is a supplementary appropriation, this SOP, for additional funds for the Canterbury earthquake recovery, demolitions and associated costs and non-departmental expenditure in relation to Sarah. Mr. Speaker, why that is germane is because the process in Canterbury is taking too long. Mr. Speaker, we're going to be voting against, of course, the broad supplementary estimates, but we wouldn't stand in the way, Mr. Speaker, of additional funding for needed demolitions in Christchurch. Mr. Speaker, Canterbury's been suffering. Canterbury wants to rebuild. But I guess the broader point is that's an emblem for the whole of our country. New Zealand wants to rebuild. New Zealand didn't elect the current government, Mr. Speaker, just to cut costs on the government budget. Just to cut costs on the government budget. Cost cutting has its uses, but it is nobody's idea of a real plan, not a vision for the future, not a way of making New Zealand great, not a statement of the values that bind us together, not a statement of how we're going to progress out of this rut to a better place. But if the Minister and the Chair thinks it is, perhaps he could take a call and explain to us how cost-cutting takes New Zealand forward and why the government does not currently appear to have a plan for jobs and growth, why it is planning to sell off state assets as a substitute for a plan that creates value and creates job, getting people back to work and off benefits, thereby helping the fiscal balance. Why are we selling assets, Mr. Minister, if we had instead we could have a real plan that caused growth, created growth?
Can I just say to the member that the first part of the debate is about the definition of the supplementary estimates. What the member's actually getting into is the second part, Schedule 1, where those things can be debated. But here it's more about process, about definition. So it's very narrow.
Mr. Speaker. Point of order, Mr Speaker. My understanding was in the introduction to this part of the committee stage that you were referring to both of the Clause 5.1 and Schedule 1, both contained on supplementary order paper.
No, just Schedule 5.1.
All right. Well, then that would explain
Clause
the
5.1,
disjuncture.
Clause 1.
It's 5.1, Clause 1. Well, that would explain the disjuncture in our views, Mr Speaker.
So, point of order, the Honourable Chris.
I would like to bring your attention to Clause 107, Clause 2 of the Speaker's ruling, which points to the fact that if the Chair brings the Speaker to account on more than one occasion, in this case 3 or 4 occasions about relevancy, that he may terminate his speech. And there is something this side of the House would be pleased to see, sir.
The Chair will make that decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
I've dealt with the issue.
No, different issue. Are we dealing with supplementary order paper number 246 or just clause 5.1 on 246? And in that case, are we not allowed to talk about Schedule 1 on SOP number 246?
That Schedule 1 is the next question. This one we're doing here is purely Clause 5.1. Okay? There's 2 questions. So we're just doing Clause 5.1. It's about process, about definition, and then we get into Schedule 1. Of 246, yes. I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, I gratefully accept your ruling, but I sir, would venture to say that if you reflect on the Hansard, you will, I think, find that you did introduce the 2 questions, or appear to introduce the 2 questions, not just the 2 sub-questions of the first question, hence the approach that the opposition has taken in this committee stage. If we are therefore not to talk about the substantive schedule, which is around Canterbury, and are limited to Clause 5.1, then that's obviously a simple procedural swap of certain documents around the supplementary estimates. And what is key to that, Mr Chairman, is that there is a great lack of transparency in some of the budget documents that are around the supplementary estimates. That what we find, what our spokespeople have found as they've been trawling through the budget, is that it is sometimes very difficult and very opaque in this budget to find where the money has gone in reference to previous year spending and current output classes. The government seems to have a habit of aggregating to the level where it's difficult for the public to follow what is being done. And that has been made worse, sir, by several, I think, grossly unprecedented acts in this budget, such as having a $980 million unspecified budget reduction. Mr Speaker, I'll terminate there.
I call the Honourable Member Amy Adams.